I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped through those polished glass doors. The way the security guard's eyes flicked over my worn Swandry jacket. The slight pause before he gave a curt nod. I'd seen that look before. But never inside a place where my own flesh and blood worked. I just hadn't expected it from her. Not from my son's wife. Not in Wellington, where I'd lived my entire 71 years and watched this very building rise from an empty lot back in 1987. My name is Albert Hawthorne. Most folks around the Hutt Valley still call me Bertie, the way my late wife Marika used to. I drive a 2003 Toyota Hilux that's seen more farm tracks than highways, and I wear the same pair of boots I bought from a co-op in Masterton 14 years ago. I don't own a smartphone that does anything fancier than make calls. I don't believe in flashing what you have. My father, a returned soldier from Crete, taught me one thing above all else. A man who needs to tell you he's wealthy hasn't really earned it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Because the morning of that humiliation didn't come out of nowhere. It had been building for years, slow as cowrie sap, and I'd been too stubborn or too soft to see it coming. It was a Tuesday in late autumn, the kind of Wellington morning where the southerly cuts straight through your jumper and the harbor looks like beaten pewter. I'd driven into the city from my little place out in Wainuiomata, 3 bedrooms, a vegetable patch, a leaky shed I keep meaning to fix. Nothing fancy. To anyone passing on the road, it would look like the home of a retired tradie scraping by on his pension. That's exactly how I liked it. I'd come in to withdraw $80 in cash. Just 80. I needed it for the Saturday farmers market in Lower Hutt, where old Tane sells his honey, and Mrs. Petrov makes those pierogi that remind me of the ones my mother used to fold on the kitchen bench. They don't take card. Never have. I'd been buying from those stalls for the better part of 30 years, and I wasn't about to change my Saturday ritual now. I could have used the ATM. The wife of my son had asked me 100 times why I didn't just tap a card at the supermarket like everyone else. But there's something about handing over notes to people who've worked for what they're selling. It's a courtesy, a way of saying, I see you, and I respect what you do with your hands. Marika understood that. She'd be gone 14 years come November, and not a day passed I didn't miss her quiet wisdom. So in I went, into the Lambton Quay branch of Maritime Pacific Bank, the very institution where I'd held accounts since the 70s, back when it was still called Wellington Trust, back when the manager knew everyone by name and you could borrow against a handshake. The branch had changed. Marble floors now. Glass partitions. Young women in blazers tapping at tablets and offering people sparkling water like it was a hotel lobby instead of a place where farmers used to come in muddy boots to deposit their checks. I always felt a little out of place these days, but I never imagined I'd be made to feel unwelcome. I stood in the queue. There were 3 people ahead of me. I didn't mind waiting. At my age, you learn to enjoy standing still. I watched the tellers work. Watched a young man in a charcoal suit chatting with one of the staff. And I thought about how Marika would have loved the carpet they'd put in soft blue, like the Tasman on a calm day. When my turn came, I stepped up to the counter. The teller was a young woman, perhaps 25, with red-rimmed glasses and a name badge that read Caitlin. She gave me a polite smile. How can I help you, sir? Just a withdrawal, love. $80, please. From the everyday account, I slid my card across the counter, along with my driver's license. She took them without comment and began typing. And that's when I heard the voice. The voice I knew well. The voice that used to laugh at my jokes at Christmas dinner, back when she still bothered. Caitlin, I'll handle this one. I looked up, and there she was. My son's wife. Genevieve Quincy Hawthorne. She'd insisted on the hyphenation when she married my Daniel 6 years ago, said her family name was too important to drop. 41 years old, sleek black hair pulled back tight enough to lift her eyebrows, wearing a tailored gray suit that probably cost more than my truck. the branch manager. The youngest branch manager Maritime Pacific had ever appointed in Wellington, a fact she'd reminded the family of at every gathering since her promotion 2 years ago. "Genevieve," I said, surprised. I tried for a friendly tone. "Didn't expect to see you out front." She didn't smile. She didn't acknowledge me as family. She didn't even use my name. She just stepped behind the counter, took the card and license from Caitlin, and made a small theatrical show of examining them, as though she'd never seen them before. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, loud enough that the people behind me could hear. "We don't typically process such small transactions at the manager's desk. But since you're here, let's see." She tapped at the keyboard. I watched her face. There was something in it I hadn't seen at family dinners, or perhaps I had seen it and chosen not to recognize. A coldness, a pleasure in this small piece of power. $80, she repeated. And now there was a smirk forming at the corner of her mouth. "Mr. Hawthorne, can I be honest with you?" "You usually are," I said carefully. "This branch, this part of Lambton Quay, we cater to a certain clientele. Professionals, investors, people with substantial portfolios. When customers like you come in for cash withdrawals of this size, frankly, it slows things down for everyone else." The room had gone quieter. I could feel it. The young man in the charcoal suit had stopped chatting. Caitlin had taken half a step back. "It's $80 from my own account, Genevieve. I've banked here longer than you've been alive." She gave a small, pitying laugh. "Yes, well, times have changed. Look, I'll process it for you today, but I do think you might be more comfortable at one of our community branches. The 9I one, perhaps. They're set up for, she gestured vaguely at my jacket, my boots, the leather wallet I'd had since the 80s, the kind of customer you are. We don't really serve people from the gutter at this branch." The word landed in my chest like a stone dropped down a well. The gutter. I felt the heat climb up my neck. Not anger. Not yet. Something stranger. A kind of stillness. The way the air goes before a southerly front sweeps in over Cook Strait. I was aware of every face in that bank turning toward me. I was aware of the security guard glancing over. I was aware of my own breath, slow and even, and of Mareka's voice in my memory saying what she always said when people were cruel. "Don't answer them with your tongue, Bertie. Answer them with your life." I took my card and license back from her. I took the $80 she counted out with deliberate slowness, 4 crisp 20s, and I slid them into my old wallet. I looked at her one more time. She was still smiling, that small, satisfied smile. "Thank you, Genevieve," I said quietly. "Have a pleasant day." And I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a scene. I didn't say what I could have said, that the gutter she spoke of had raised 3 brothers who fought at El Alamein, that the gutter had built half the houses in Nanai after the war, that the gutter had paid for the very marble floor she stood on. I just walked out into the cold Wellington wind and stood for a moment with my hand on the bonnet of my old Hilux, breathing. Then I drove home to Wainuiomata. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat in the kitchen Mareka and I had renovated together in 1994 with our own hands, and I looked out at the lemon tree she'd planted the year Daniel was born. And then I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I picked up the phone and rang my solicitor. To understand what came next, you need to understand who I am. Or rather, who I let people think I wasn't. I started working at 14, mucking out stables on a sheep station near Martinborough. By 18, I was driving a milk tanker. By 22, I'd saved enough to buy a small section of land on the outskirts of Upper Hutt Bear Scrub. Nothing on it. The kind of dirt nobody wanted. I built a house there with my brother Edmund. Then I bought another section. Then another. By the time I was 30, I owned 11 properties across the Hutt Valley. By 40, the number had grown to 43. I never advertised this. I never told the neighbors. I lived in the same modest house Mareka and I had bought as newlyweds, and I drove the same kind of utility vehicle I'd driven since the 80s. The properties paid for themselves through quiet, steady rentals to working families, teachers, nurses, posties, the kind of people who needed a fair landlord and a roof that didn't leak. In 1998, I sold a portion of the portfolio and put the proceeds into a private investment trust. By 2010, that trust had grown into something I never expected. By the time of that morning at the bank, the trust held assets worth more than $14 million, spread across property, government bonds, and a controlling stake in a small but profitable Wairarapa wine label that exported to Singapore. Mareka and I had decided together, long before she got sick, that none of this would change how we lived. We didn't want our money to raise our son. We wanted us to raise him, and we wanted him to grow up believing he had to earn his own way. Daniel had. He'd worked hard, gone to Victoria University, become a civil engineer. I was proud of him. He'd married a little late. He was 35 when he met Genevieve at a banking function he'd attended for work. She'd swept him off his feet, or so he told me. I had reservations from the start, but I kept them to myself. Mareka had always said, a son must choose his own path, even the painful ones. Now, sitting at my kitchen table with the phone in my hand, I thought about all of this. My solicitor was a man named Harlan Beaumont. We'd known each other since 1979. He picked up on the second ring. Bertie. Everything all right? Harlan, I said. I think it's time I made some changes. Are you free this Friday? I'll clear the morning. I put the phone down. Then I picked it up again and rang my accountant, a sharp old bird in Kandala named Phillida Roxburgh. Same conversation. Friday morning. I asked her to bring the full statement of holdings at Maritime Pacific Bank. That night I sat with a glass of Pinot Noir from my own Wairarapa label, and I thought about Genevieve, and I thought about Daniel, and I thought about how I was going to handle this without losing the thing that mattered most. Because here's what I'd decided in the long, quiet drive home that afternoon. This wasn't about revenge. It was about a lesson. And lessons, when properly given, can save a life. Friday came. Harlan and Phillida sat in my dining room. Phillida laid out the statements. Through Maritime Pacific Bank, I held the trust's primary operating account, 3 term deposits, 2 business accounts under the wine label and the property holding company, and a substantial personal money market account. The total balance across these accounts on that morning, give or take, was $4,260,000 New Zealand dollars. Genevieve, as branch manager of the Lambton Quay branch, would have access to broad customer information across the network. But the trust accounts and the wine company were registered under their corporate names, not mine personally. She'd never bothered to look. Why would she? She'd already decided who I was. What do you want to do, Bertie? Harlan asked. I'd been thinking about this for 3 days. I had a plan. I want to move it, I said. All of it. Every dollar. To Southern Cross Heritage. Phillida raised an eyebrow. All of it? That's a substantial transfer. There are processes. Notice periods on some of the term deposits. I'm aware. I want it done correctly, by the book, every step documented. And I want the closing transaction to be done in person, at the Lambton Quay branch, with the full notice given to senior management. Harlan watched me. You want her there. I want it to happen on her watch, in her branch, with her authorization required. And I want the transfer processed at the manager's desk because, as she told me herself, that desk handles substantial transactions. Phillida actually smiled. Bertie, you old shark. I'm not a shark, Phil. I'm a man who's been told he doesn't belong somewhere he helped build. I just want to see her face when she finds out who she turned away. We worked through the morning. Phillida arranged the corresponding receiving accounts at Southern Cross Heritage. Harlan drafted the correspondence. By Wednesday of the following week, everything was in place. The notice period had elapsed. The receiving institution was ready. On Thursday morning, I rang the regional headquarters of Maritime Pacific Bank. I asked to speak with the regional director, a woman named Annika Whitfield I'd met once at a charity dinner years ago. I told her I'd be coming into the Lambton Quay branch the following day to close out a substantial portfolio of accounts, and that I'd appreciate the courtesy of senior representation given the size of the transaction. I gave her the figure. There was a long pause on the line. 260,000? She asked. 4,260,000. Spread across 6 accounts and 3 corporate entities. The pause was longer. Mr. Hawthorne, may I ask why you're closing these accounts? You may ask, I said. But I'd prefer to discuss it in person tomorrow, at the branch, with your branch manager present, and whoever else from your senior team you feel ought to attend. She agreed. She also asked if I'd consider letting them try to retain my business. I told her I'd hear them out, but that my mind was largely made up. We arranged for 10 o'clock the next morning, Friday, the day of reckoning. I dressed the same way I always did. Clean trousers, a checked shirt, my old swandry, my work boots. I didn't shave any closer than usual. I didn't put on the watch Marika had bought me for our 30th anniversary, the one I kept in a drawer for special occasions. I wanted Genevieve to see exactly the same man she'd dismissed 3 weeks earlier. I drove into the city. I parked in the same public garage. I walked through the same glass doors. The security guard nodded at me with the same flicker of disdain. I queued at the same counter. Caitlin was on duty again. She gave me a tentative smile, which I returned warmly. Mr. Hawthorne, she said. I'm sorry about last time. It's all right, love, I said. Wasn't your doing. Could you let your manager know I'm here, please? She's expecting me. And so is Regional Director Whitfield, I believe. The color drained from Caitlin's face. She picked up her phone. Within 90 seconds, the door to the back offices opened, and out came Annika Whitfield, immaculate in a navy skirt suit, followed by a tall man I didn't recognize, likely the area compliance officer, and behind them, looking confused, came my son's wife, Genevieve. She saw me. Her brow furrowed. Then she looked at Annika, then back at me, and I watched the gears turn behind her eyes. She had no idea why I was there. None of the senior staff had told her the name of the client they were meeting that morning. She'd been simply summoned to attend a high-priority transaction. Mr. Hawthorne, Annika said, extending her hand. Thank you for coming in. Please, come through to the consultation room. I'd prefer the manager's desk, actually, I said pleasantly. If that's not too much trouble. I've been told that's where substantial transactions are handled at this branch. Genevieve's face was a study. She still hadn't quite worked it out. We walked to her desk, a glass-top table near the front of the bank, where everyone in the queue and at the tellers could see and hear. I sat down. Annika sat beside me. The compliance officer remained standing. Genevieve, after a moment of hesitation, took her own chair behind the desk, and now there were 3 of them facing me, and the whole branch was watching, and I could see Caitlin's hand pressed to her mouth from across the room. Right, I said. Shall we begin? Annika opened a folder. Mr. Hawthorne, I want to start by saying that Maritime Pacific Bank deeply values your business. Looking at your portfolio, we see that you've been a customer of this institution for 51 years. Your trust accounts alone. Trust accounts? Genevieve said. Annika glanced at her, a flicker of irritation. Yes, Genevieve. Mr. Hawthorne is the principal of the Hawthorne Family Trust, which holds, I'm sorry, what trust? The compliance officer cleared his throat. Miss Quincy Hawthorne, perhaps you weren't aware. The Hawthorne Family Trust has been one of this branch's largest private clients for over 15 years. Mr. Hawthorne is also the controlling director of Manawa Heights Holdings and Tarata Sellers Limited. I watched her face. I watched her mouth open slightly, then close. I watched the color leave her cheeks the way it had left Caitlin's, but for entirely different reasons. Manawa Heights, she began. That'd be the property holding company, I said gently. 41 residential properties across the Hutt and a small commercial block in Petone. And Tarata Cellars is the wine label. We've been trying to get into the New Zealand House restaurants for years. I think we might have managed it last quarter. Had to check with my export manager. Genevieve's hand had gone to the edge of the desk. She gripped it. Now, I continued, opening my own folder. Phillida had packaged everything beautifully. I'd like to proceed with the closures. All 6 accounts. Total balance, as of close of business yesterday, $4,263,412, give or take a few cents in interest accrual. Receiving institution is Southern Cross Heritage. The corresponding account details are here, certified by my solicitor and accountant. Annika took the folder. She passed it to the compliance officer, who began verifying the documents. Mr. Hawthorne, Annika said, her voice carefully neutral, is there a particular reason you've decided to move your accounts? Service issue? A better rate elsewhere? We may be able to— There was an incident, I said. 3 weeks ago. At this branch. At this very desk, in fact. I came in to withdraw $80. Your branch manager, my son's wife, as it happens, refused to process it without first informing me, in front of a queue of customers, that this branch did not serve people from the gutter. The silence in that bank was the deepest silence I have ever heard. I didn't look at Genevieve. I kept my eyes on Annika. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw Genevieve's mouth move to say what? I'll never know. Because nothing came out. I see, Annika said, quietly. I want to be clear, I continued. I'm not here to ask for anyone to be punished. That's between Maritime Pacific and Ms. Quincy Hawthorne. What I'm here to do is move my money to an institution that doesn't categorize customers by the cut of their coat. I'm 71 years old. I've worked since I was 14. I've banked at this institution since 1974. And I will not be insulted in a building I helped capitalize. Annika nodded. The compliance officer nodded. Genevieve sat very still. There's one more thing, I said. I'd like the closure paperwork signed by the branch manager personally, as is standard for transactions of this size. Annika hesitated. Then she turned to Genevieve. Ms. Quincy Hawthorne, please process the closures. Genevieve's hands shook as she reached for the paperwork. She signed each form. 6 accounts, 6 signatures. The transfer was authorized. By the time the last form was signed, her face was wet, but she made no sound. I felt something in me go very quiet. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just a kind of hollow finality. When it was done, Annika stood and offered me her hand once more. Mr. Hawthorne, I'm deeply sorry. There will be a full internal review. I'm sure there will, I said. Thank you, Ms. Whitfield. I stood up. I looked at Genevieve for the first time since I'd sat down. Her eyes were red, but underneath the tears there was something else. Calculation. Even now, she was calculating. You should know, I said quietly, leaning slightly forward, that I'm not telling Daniel about this. Not today. He's going to find out from you. Tonight. Over dinner. You're going to tell my son what you said to me. And you're going to tell him what just happened. And if you don't, I will. But I'm giving you the chance. Because despite everything, you are still his wife. And he loves you. And he deserves to hear it from you first. She nodded. Just once. A small, broken nod. I walked out of the bank for the second time. The wind off the harbor hit me the same as it had 3 weeks earlier. But I walked differently this time. Not taller. I'm not the kind of man who walks tall. Just lighter. That evening, around 7, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was strange. Tight. He asked if he could come over. I said, of course. He arrived 40 minutes later, alone. I knew the moment I opened the door that Genevieve had told him, some of it at least. He stood in my kitchen, the kitchen he'd grown up in, and he looked at me. And he looked at the lemon tree through the window. And he started to cry. He was 41 years old, and he cried like a boy. Dad, he said. Dad, I had no idea. The properties, the wine label, the trust. Genevieve said tonight she said you had millions. Sit down, son, I said. I'll put the kettle on. We talked for 4 hours. He'd known nothing of the scale of it. He'd known we owned the house in Wainuiomata outright, that I had some rental properties. He'd helped me fix a fence at one of them when he was 19, but he'd never asked further, and Mareka and I had never told. We hadn't wanted him to know. We hadn't wanted it to shape his choices. He'd built his career on his own merit, and that was the gift we'd given him. But what hurt him more than the money, far more, was what his wife had said to me in that bank. She told me, Dad. She told me she thought that you'd come in for cash because you were short. She said she was trying to push you toward a more appropriate branch. She said it was kindness. Dad. She used the word kindness. What do you think, son? He was quiet for a long time. He looked at his hands. I think I've been pretending not to see who she's become for 6 years. I think I noticed. The first Christmas. The way she spoke to Mum's old neighbors. I think I noticed the way she rolled her eyes at your truck. I think I told myself she was just sharp, just ambitious, just a city woman who didn't know our ways yet. But she did know, Dad. She knew. And she chose. And she chose to look down. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. He stayed the night in his old bedroom. The next morning, we walked down to the gate and looked at the lemon tree his mother had planted. And he told me he was going to think hard about his marriage. I told him that was his decision and his alone, and that whatever he chose, I'd be there. That's what fathers do. In the weeks that followed, the rest unfolded the way these things unfold. The internal review at Maritime Pacific found that Genevieve had not only been unprofessional, but had accessed customer account information outside of the scope required for her role on multiple occasions, including, it turned out, looking up balances of family members. That last bit was a serious breach of banking conduct standards. She was dismissed. The dismissal was reported to the Financial Markets Authority, and her practicing rights within the New Zealand banking sector were placed under review. She would not work as a bank manager again. Daniel and Genevieve separated 3 months later. The divorce was civil, mostly. They had no children, which I'd quietly thanked the universe for many times. She moved to Auckland, took a job in commercial real estate, and I genuinely hope she is finding her way to something better. I hold no grudge. I never did. What I did to draw a line, not to wound. But here is the part I want you to understand. The part that took me decades of living to learn, and which I share now because I am old. And I do not have endless years left to teach my son, my future grandchildren, or anyone else who might listen. We live in a country, in a world, that increasingly mistakes the visible for the valuable. We see a worn jacket and assume a worn life. We see polished shoes and assume substance. We measure people in branded goods, in the size of their cars, in the addresses on their letters. And in doing so, we miss almost everything that matters about them. I was a wealthy man on the day I walked into that bank. I am a wealthy man today. But the wealth that mattered most to me was never in those 6 accounts. It was in the lemon tree my wife planted. It was in the morning my brother and I poured the foundations of our first house together in 1976. It was in the families in my rental properties whose children grew up safely under roofs I kept solid. It was in the Saturday morning at the farmer's market when old Tane hands me a jar of honey and asks how the missus is doing, and I tell him she's been gone 14 years, and he says, "Ah, but she's still with you, Bertie. Isn't she?" And I say yes. Every day. That is wealth. The accounts were just numbers. If you have parents who live modestly, do not assume their lives are small. If you have grandparents who wear the same coat for 20 winters, do not assume they are pinching pennies. The generation that built this country, the men who came back from the war, the women who held the farms together, the immigrants who arrived with cardboard suitcases, they did not believe in announcing themselves. They believed in being useful. They believed in lasting. They believed that what you do quietly is worth more than what you do for show. If you work in a position where you can choose how to treat people at a counter, at a desk, behind a till, at a hospital reception, anywhere, please remember this. The next worn jacket you see may belong to the person who paid for the very building you stand in. Or, more importantly, to someone who has nothing but their dignity. Both deserve the same warmth from you. Both. Because the test of who you are is not how you treat the powerful. It is how you treat those you mistakenly believe are powerless. And to anyone listening tonight who feels perhaps that you are invisible, that you have been dismissed for the way you look, the way you speak, the place you come from, I want you to know that your worth is not in the eye of the person who failed to see you. It is in the lives you have lived, the people you have loved, the work of your hands. They cannot take that from you. No matter how many marble floors they stand on, I still drive the old Hilux. I still wear the boots. I still buy honey from Tane on Saturdays. The lemon tree gave a record crop last year, and I dropped a bag off at Caitlin's flat in Karori. She got in touch a few months after it all happened, just to say sorry again, and we became friends of a sort. She's training as a teacher now. Good on her. Daniel comes for Sunday lunch most weeks. He's quieter than he used to be, but he laughs more easily too, the way he did as a boy. He started seeing a kind young woman who teaches primary school in Nanai. She's been over once. She admired the lemon tree. She asked about Mareka. She listened. I think Mareka would have liked her. That's the end of my story. Not a triumphant one, just a true one. And I tell it now in the hope that somebody, somewhere, perhaps a young woman behind a counter, perhaps a young man who's just been given his first taste of authority, perhaps an older person who has been made to feel small, will hear it and remember. Wealth is silent. Arrogance is loud. And the measure of a life is not in what you accumulate, but in how gently you carry it, and how kindly you spend it on those who have less. Look after each other. That's all any of us are really here to do.